So it's with great pleasure that I introduce you all to Kati and Phoebe, who I know a little through. I'm a little bit in, you know, on the periphery of the project that they're going to be talking about today. Um, but both of them have got lots of expertise of working with young people in, co-production, participatory modes. I'm sorry, I'm having to admit people at the same time as talking to you. Um, both have got a lot of experience in, you know, doing collaborative work with young people and children, and in working in partnerships with people. Um, Both from Melbourne Uni School of Population and Global Health. Um, I don't know if I need to say much more other than I'm really impressed by their energy and creativity, and determination to do stuff that is really supporting kids and young people in the context of climate change. And I think you're going to find what they can tell us about the Climate Superpowers project really interesting. So I'll hand over to the two of you. I don't know how you're going to share it between you, but I'm sure you know. So do go ahead.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. I think Kati's going to start us off.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Can you see it well
Yes.
now?
Yep,
Perfect.
perfect.
That's great. Well, let me just thanks everyone for coming today. I know it's not the best time for everyone. And yeah, continuing with our introductions, we're both from the University of Melbourne from the Disasters, Climate and Adversity Unit. And we're here today to talk about the Climate Superpowers project. Let's see there. I would like to take a moment first. Something that we do in Australia is always acknowledge the lands that where we are standing on as unceded land, that and also to extend our respects to the traditional custodians of those lands. In this case, in the land that today is commonly known as Melbourne, it's also known as Narm, and it's the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. So I would like to extend my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, as well as the elders and traditional custodians of the lands where everybody else is standing today. And also take a brief moment also to acknowledge all the people as well as animals, plants that are being affected by the fires happening right now in Los Angeles in the United States. So to tell you a little bit about Climate Superpowers, it started as a small co-design project with young people between 12 and 25 years old in Victoria that led to the creation of this website. And since then, it has grown into a big family of colleagues, young collaborators, co-researchers, co-designers, and also different small projects. But overall, the idea is to generate resources that incorporate young people's perspectives on how to navigate the challenges of climate change, especially those challenges to well-being and mental health. And to achieve that, also to develop other projects where co-designers and co-researchers may be practitioners supporting those young people like teachers, with the aim of helping them help young people as well. So this started with the problem that climate change is obviously having increasing impacts on young people's mental health, sense of well-being, ideas about what the future is going to look like, with lots of complex emotions, including anxiety, feelings of powerlessness, sadness, grief, anger, frustration, and also, annoyance. There's a big spectrum that we're all getting very familiar with. And they're also the generation that is going to be the most affected by climate change. Um, and yet they are at the forefront of climate action. However, they do feel that they do face a lot of challenges in the sense of having a lower status due to their age in society. They normally have to face a lot of barriers in terms of being listened to. And in this context, we took some time to go through what resources were out there for young people on how to deal with all these challenges. And we found that while there was a very, rapidly growing number of resources, there were mostly made either for young people from the perspectives of people, who were adults, who were, experts in mental health, for example, and education, but not from a young person's perspective. And also that there was also quite a big amount of resources focusing on how to tell adults how to talk to young people, but not necessarily something about gathering people together and supporting them in having these conversations in a way that is youth-led and that leads to also youth-led action. So for the creation of this first resource, the website, we had 5 workshops with 31 children and young people between 12 and 25 in Victoria, which is a state in Australia that is very exposed to bushfires and was very affected during the Black Summer bushfires of 2019 and 2020. But previously, it had also dealt with also catastrophic fires in 2009. So while most of the young people here were from metropolitan areas, there were also people who were living more in the outer metropolitan rural areas of Melbourne that were affected by those fires in 2009. And we also had input from 50 young people, approximately, from a suburb in Melbourne's inner west, who participated through a youth climate forum that was organized by our local council. And based on that, we developed a strength-based resource. And with their ideas, we developed both the contents of the resource as well as the design elements. So from the artwork to what is said. And the principles that guided it was all based on their ideas. During these workshops, the idea was to have an open conversation. We had some prompts depending on the age group. And it was really about listening to them and hearing what they thought, what were their stories of dealing with climate change? How did they learn about it? What did they do about it? How did they feel? And what we found was that despite the fact that they felt anxious, they felt frustrated, sometimes they felt scared, they also felt very competent and capable of making a very important contribution individually and also as a generation. And they share some tips and stories and experiences, all those we gathered into the resource. And we also asked them to help us develop a set of principles for how we should work together. So that would be guiding the way that we created these resources throughout this project and future ones, and also to help us develop kind of an agenda for future projects. In terms of principles, there was wide agreement that this resource had to be constructed in a way that was sustainable and also produced and disseminated in a way that was sustainable. So, people questioned whether it was necessary to actually print something. That's why we all decided that an online resource would be more useful. It had to be empowering and inclusive for young people, so had putting young people at the center. So that's where the strength-based approach was really important. It was not about just focusing on, the vulnerabilities of young people, but more what they can do and what strengths and resources they have that are unique that they bring to the table. The process of doing these workshops and developing, and also everything that came afterwards will have to be participatory and transparent, so always having young people involved, helping make key decisions across the whole process, but also in a very transparent way. So when we are talking about participatory approaches, it's quite a complex and nuanced approach. You cannot always, and it's not always appropriate for everybody to be engaged in the same way all the time across every single stage of the process. In this case, we have a very strong component of co-design But we also have a growing collaboration with young people. So some people started more within workshops, and they've grown to be, very strong collaborators, developing their own initiatives, inviting us to their events, and even some young people who are kind of on the older range have also become research assistants for our team. But also very importantly, it had to be engaging. It couldn't be just about, providing information. It had to be interactive. It had to be attractive. There had to be a visual artistic aspect that was strong and that young people would find relatable. So a quiz was what many of our co-designers thought would be, who would help us tick all those boxes. It was the time 2022 when quizzes were the latest trend in all websites. And so together, based on the seven climate superpowers, Phoebe's gonna tell us a little bit more about that. We develop a set of questions that are meant to actually be fun and engaging. We were not trying to create a standardized measuring instrument. It was about getting people to something that, they felt that was for them, that reflected their experiences, and then they would lead to, tell them this is your main superpower. All these superpowers have been developed from a very in-depth review that Phoebe carried out on disaster recovery social capitals, but were translated into kind of like a climate change language and experiences and actions, and to fit the context of young people's lives in Victoria with their help. So with them, we went through each one of these and we developed examples of how they lived them in their everyday lives. So we've got human superpowers. Those are the ones that have to do with our own inner resilience, our education, our emotional intelligence. They manifest, for example, in those people who have a call for educating other people, for supporting people who are emotionally feeling more affected by climate change. We have social superpowers. Those are the young people who have the talent to connect either online or in person with other people, to gather them together, to work together on climate action. For example, we've got natural superpowers that have to do with that connection with nature that can be used as a way of to learn from it, to protect it, but also to heal oneself. We got political superpowers related to directly participating in collective action or individually, but with the aim of transforming society, transforming our values, transforming our policies, transforming our laws. We've got build superpowers. Those have to do with technology, infrastructure, those young people who are really interested in the new developments in terms of housing development, energy that can lead to more sustainable futures. Then we got cultural superpowers, which are those that everybody, gets from their cultural background, the legacy of their ancestors and the place where they come from. It can be art as well. It can be values. And finally, we have financial superpowers that have to do with, of course, money. For example, donating, investing. But in the case of young people and everybody else, it's also about time, which is the most precious resource that we have. So it's about how we invest our time and energy and other resources into building more sustainable futures and mitigating climate change. And this is an example, a screenshot of what it looks like when a young person with cultural superpowers answers the quiz. It leads you to a description of that superpower and also a list of suggestions on how they can use them. And you also get this little graph that shows what are your other superpowers. The idea is not to evaluate people. The idea is not to compare who's better than the other one, who's got the best superpower of all. It's about visually showing people that we've all got something to bring to the table. Everyone's got unique contributions. And when we bring them together, it makes us more powerful. And you can also work on either using your strongest talents or also building up those skills that you feel need to be strengthened as well. And as I said, we recommend based on the results that everybody gets, what would be perhaps the most appropriate actions for them, the ones that would be more engaging, the ones that would, flow a little bit better for them, the ones that they would find more interesting and important. And those actions are classified according to the key dimensions that young people explained that they navigated in their everyday life when they came to climate change. So the first one was learning about climate change. Learning about climate change from the start obviously generated anxiety, but continuing to learn about it in a way that was protective of well-being contributed to a higher sense of hope and control over the whole situation. Ignorance, on the other hand, really generated a lot of anxiety and uncertainty and powerlessness. So knowledge is power, obviously. Everyday life actions, we have to do more with those small actions, those everyday changes to our lifestyles that, they add up together and give us a sense of connection to nature or connection to the climate action movement, for example. Then we have transforming society actions that are perhaps, for example, more linked to political superpowers. They're about, collectively trying to transform our society with intention. And finally, we've got self-care, which is a dimension that comes across all these other dimensions. It's about taking care of the planet as you also take care of yourself, and your self-care also allowing you to be better prepared to protect the planet as well. And that also involves also taking care of others. And now I'm handing over to Phoebe so she can tell you a little bit more about what happened since the creation of that first resource.
Thanks so much, Kati. So this is on this slide we're seeing a few images of ways that the Climate Superpowers website sort of made its way out into the world in the few months following its release. So it went live in October 2022, and we had a launch event. And so you can see a photo from that event where the co-designers who came along, and some of them were spoke as panelists, which was fantastic. And we were pleased that the resource got featured in the Department of Education and Training Environmental Sustainability in Schools policy. So that's the Victorian, the state government in our area. But I think what excited all of us most were the ways that the co-designers themselves sort of took the resource and sort of championed it within their network. So one of them got it shared in her local MP's newsletter, for example. You can see a TikTok video there, and there was a stall at another school sort of sustainability focused event. So that was sort of some of the immediate stuff. And then we've been really fortunate that a lot of the co-designers and also some of the teachers who were involved in the early stages were really keen to sort of continue on this journey with us and see sort of what else could be built upon this to sort of, keep it going and keep it growing. So Kati, on the next slide. Actually, I wonder if I can, no, I probably can't flick it across. Okay, thank you. So one of the things that we were hearing a lot as we were sort of telling people about the website that had been created, which you can access at climatesuperpowers.org, by the way. I don't know if that's already been caught, was that we were hearing from a lot of teachers that they were really interested in the resource and they saw a lot of potential for using this kind of thing within their classrooms or in their interactions with students. But that as, everyone knows, teachers really have so much on their plates already. And so that they were explaining that it would be really helpful to have more resources to kind of bridge that kind of uptake and implementation, make it really sort of a classroom ready resource. So we took on this new project, which we called Climate Superpowers in the Classroom, where we worked with, again, some young people, this time at a high school and also at the university level, as well as some educators at each of those levels. And together, again, we ran workshops and, brainstormed ideas for what what it could look like to draw upon the Climate Superpowers website and the idea of these 7 superpowers, which actually I should say, Kati mentioned that they came from some previous work, which was actually not my work originally. We sort of have borrowed this idea of these 7 kind of categories of strengths from actually a community development framework. And so we sort of put that to the young people and asked, does it make sense to think about your strengths in relation to these 7 categories? And basically they said yes, but the original framework used the phrasing of capitals. So it was a community capitals framework. And as is probably not surprising to anyone, that language didn't really resonate with young people. And so that's where the superpowers language came in. Anyway, that was an aside to explaining that, yes, we were brainstorming ideas for classroom activities. And then what happened is that the educators and the young people who were involved actually went and tested out running some of those activities within the classes that were going on at that time. And then based on how that went, we had some more workshops, got feedback, and developed things up into some resources that we then added to the Climate Superpowers website. So they're available for other students or teachers who want to sort of initiate this kind of thing in their own contexts. So on the next slide, Kati. So one of the things that, one of the resources that came out of that was actually this 3-minute video, because they essentially, the co-designers were recognising how important it was to have something that people could very easily sort of show to a group of young people to explain what this whole thing was about. So we created this video starring a lot of the co-designers, and it was created by all young people, except for Kati and I probably can't quite get away with calling ourselves that young anymore. And I think there should actually be a link, Kati, to play this video. It's quite short.
Would you like me to play it now, or maybe
yeah,
at the end?
If you, oh yeah, okay, maybe we can play it at the end. That's a good idea. We'll come back to it. But it was edited, and the artwork as well is by and the animation all by young people. So on the next slide, Kati, I think there's some examples of, the one after that. Yes, so to touch on some of the resources that we put together for sort of lesson plan guidance. Basically, we put together a sort of a mix and match kind of resource for teachers who would want to introduce this to students. But yeah, we were trying to sort of accommodate as much flexibility as possible so that teachers, could, depending on the amount of time they had available and what they were interested in doing. But basically the core of it was to show that 3-minute video and introduce the website to the students, and then have students take the quiz. That was the kind of, the core. And then several extension activities as optional. So doing a poll to find out, what is the spread of superpowers that we have amongst this group of people? Because the idea is that we're sort of trying to foster is that, through that diversity, it's these opportunities for young people to kind of work together and potentially develop superpowers that they didn't already have through collaboration with other students with other strengths, that kind of thing. Anyway, a bunch of options for sort of individual and group-based work. We also, actually, I think on the next slide, Kati. This is an example of one of the events that the young people at the high school level piloted. So yeah, it was this bingo activity to have the young people try to find somebody in the class who had each of the different superpowers and ask them something that they had already done with those superpowers, and also something that they would like to use those superpowers for. Next slide. And yeah, this is an individual reflection activity. So these are all on the website, among others. Next slide. Another component of what came out of that project was we did some mapping to the mapping of alignment with the Australian school curriculum, because we were hearing from teachers that was going to be important for many of them in sort of justifying taking class time to do this kind of thing. Next slide. We also did the equivalent thing at the university level, which I've already mentioned. I won't go into detail about that, though. Sorry, the stepping back for a moment to that, the Climate Superpowers in the Classroom project. The other component of it, in addition to that sort of introductory lesson, or those introductory resources, we also have included some guidance there about ideas for how teachers, if teachers were sort of motivated to do something more extended with this, basically sketching out some ways that teachers could sort of reinforce the Climate Superpowers idea over a longer period, so say throughout a term or even throughout a year, after having introduced these this idea and having students sort of start thinking about what their strengths are and what they might like to do in relation to climate change in ways that are protective of their well-being, that without having to necessarily, create more lessons, teachers could just kind of refer back to that, even at a minimum, refer back to that idea in teaching a lesson that they were already planning to teach that relates in some way to climate change. And so, for example, introduce a lesson by saying, and today we're sort of building our political superpowers in relation to climate change, if it was a class on civics education or something like that, and we're going to touch on some environmental topics. So on to the next slide, please, Kati. So kind of in parallel to doing that Climate Superpowers in the Classroom work, we were also becoming increasingly aware that there hasn't been that much attention to teacher wellbeing in relation to all of this, and that the huge growth in attention that there has been to young people's wellbeing in relation to climate change is something that we obviously are very much in favour of and are involved in ourselves. But yeah, we were sort of increasingly aware that teachers were having to navigate some pretty difficult experiences, and we were hearing about that through what we were doing, and that there was very little out there by way of research or resources or even just discussion about those kinds of challenges, given the important role that teachers are playing in supporting young people through these difficult experiences and thoughts relating to climate change, as well as just being people in the world, and all adults are sort of being faced with challenges in relation to climate change, or many are. So that led to this Teacher Climate Superpowers project, or at least that's what we're calling it at the moment, which is really focusing on creating resources specifically for teachers. And so obviously there's a lot of interplay between resources for teachers to support students and also what's going to help teachers sort of support their own wellbeing, or have their own wellbeing be supported. But we wanted to make sure that there was sort of dedicated attention to teacher wellbeing as important in its own right. So we've been doing some research to inform the development of resources, and again, taking a sort of a co-development approach involving teachers in creating these resources with us. So I think so far we did some work. We did 4 workshops. I think there were around 50 participants, I don't know off the top of my head, in those. And then we've done 14 individual interviews with teachers so far, all in Australia. And we've been doing sort of, gathering together a lot of literature on this topic as well. And we are really in the thick of putting together this pilot resource for teachers at the moment. So it's going to be a new arm of the Climate Superpowers website. And this time it will be, I think, a sort of a portal that teachers can kind of create an account to access the resources, and we're creating it as a kind of professional development opportunity and resource for teachers, which will involve, we're basically trying to build it with as much flexibility in terms of format for teachers to access the information as possible. So ranging from webinars, to self-directed modules, to just visiting a web page and downloading some resources and just grabbing it and going, but really covering off content, including not just the sort of classroom resource stuff, but also information about what are the experiences that students are having, the wellbeing challenges that students are facing in relation to climate change, and what could teachers do to navigate that, but also what are the experiences that that teachers are having in relation to climate change. And challenges that we're hearing about include things like sort of teachers' own thoughts and feelings about climate change, as I've already mentioned, as well as the the role that they're playing with students, but also things like environmental impacts directly on schools. So whether that's the impact of disasters such as bushfires or floods, and things like that. Also kind of systemic or resourcing constraint issues, and matters of the sort of the role that the curriculum plays in supporting teachers. So that is, yes, all in the works, and we're going to be piloting that in early this year, and doing some gathering for sort of initial evaluation in that process, and also sort of building towards a more formal, structured, multi-school evaluation. So I will leave it there now. I hope we have time to play that video. If we can, I think we might need to do a little bit of technical stuff with making sure the audio comes through properly. I think there's something from the host's end.
I also need to share again and make sure that it's sharing the audio. Wait 1 second.
And just while you do that, Kati, I just wanted to say as well, Anne, I think you underplayed your role in this project at the start. You've been such a huge source of insight and guidance for us through this process. And so, yeah, I'm also just really excited to have a discussion with you all in this network, because I have no doubt that there's a wealth of insights there. And one of the things in particular, I mean, there are a lot of things that I think your insights would be relevant to, but really, I think we're very open to, suggestions about how we should be approaching, putting together these resources and communicating to teachers about, appropriate ways to engage with students around this topic.
Would you like me to put play now?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
If you can.
Let's go. Please let me know if you cannot hear the sound.
I can hear it.
Everyone knows that climate change is a big and complicated problem. But the good news is that everyone has strengths they can use to help create a better future.
Even young people?
Especially young people.
Still, it can sometimes feel hard to know where to start or what to do next.
That's why a group of young people
and researchers
came together to create a website
that helps you find out your strengths, superpowers, and how to use and grow them.
At climatesuperpowers.org, you can take a quiz to find out what your superpowers are. Then you can choose what actions you want to take to use your superpowers. All of us have the strength to make a change. Where will your strengths lie?
There are 7 types of climate superpowers.
If you're really good at connecting with other people, you probably have strong social superpowers.
Things like your knowledge, skills, and life experiences, which you can draw on to tackle climate change, might be considered human superpowers.
If you have a knack for creating or transforming things physically or digitally, then your built superpowers will come in handy.
Cultural superpowers are things like your creativity, spirituality, or values, which you can use to make an impact and nurture yourself and people around you.
If you love things like caring for plants or spending time outdoors, you probably have strong natural superpowers.
Having financial superpowers doesn't mean being a billionaire. It includes things like how you choose to buy or not to buy, as well as things like fundraising or volunteering your time for a good cause.
And finally, if we catch you at a rally, signing petitions, or campaigning changes for your school, it sounds like you have political superpowers.
You might have one really strong superpower or a mix of lots of them.
Okay, so now that I know my superpower, what's next?
You can use them to learn about climate change, take action in your everyday life, in the big picture of transforming society, and to look after your own well-being.
There are actions on the website that you can do at home, school, or at work.
And the best thing is that when you use your climate superpowers, they grow even stronger, and you can even unlock new ones you didn't know you had.
So, what are your climate superpowers and how will you use them?
Thanks so much.
Fantastic, Kati and Phoebe. Are you wanting to say anything about that video before we move on to questions and discussion?
I think happy to move on to questions of discussion. I hope you enjoyed the video.
That was a lovely little video. I've seen it before, of course, but so thank you both very much for giving that really interesting and clear description of what I think is a terrific process and terrific outcomes that have come from it. And I hope everyone else has found that equally interesting. So we now do have some time for questions. Maybe put up your virtual hand if you've got a question to ask. I'm not sure I think I can see everyone on the screen. If anybody's got any questions or comments. Yes, from Mary.
Hi, this is absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm curious, in the experience you've had so far, what age, target age of children do you think is ideally suited for? Because I'd be interested in approaching teachers in the United States to think about this.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's something that we're also trying to, because it's kind of an iterative process. You start working with a group that it's still quite diverse in their age, 12 to 25. That leads to one resource, and then you build based on the agenda that you created with them. But then you look back into what was created, and then it might suit some groups more. Definitely the 12 to 25. And we are trying to think about ways to also reach out to younger kids. Of course, to younger kids, it requires a little bit working on how to make the materials, less about so much reading, maybe ideas for the future include storytelling, perhaps, other types of resources. And we also wanted to actually, that is a big question that we get. We also wanted to bring the question to this group, because one thing is the age appropriateness of the materials themselves, as educational materials. Are they in accordance to the developmental stages of the kids? And age has a lot to do with that, but not all. But also, we've received a lot of questions from teachers about the age appropriateness of talking about how serious climate change is. And that's a question we wanted to bring to you as well. As a psychologist who's not focused on developmental psychology, I focus more on trauma. What I hear from teachers when they are concerned about that, I hear a lot about like, oh, this is similar as when I talk to people about, when is it appropriate to talk about death to children? I work in other spaces related to domestic violence, and how do you talk about those very difficult topics that have to do with, things that go away, they don't come back. There's a lot of grief, there's a lot of violence as well. Ultimately, it's violence against the planet. So that's why I want to ask everyone here, like, how do we do that conversation with kids who are of different ages? Some of them are quite young, but they already know this is going on. Like we know they know probably more than what we assume they know.
It's a really good question, and I think there are people in our virtual room at the moment who'd have some good insights on that. I certainly have got opinions about it. Anyone like to add some input on that? What we say to teachers when they're asking the questions, should I be talking about climate change with my classroom? well, I'll start off while other people are thinking of wiser things to say. But to me, we do know that almost all kids know about climate change, and almost all kids are worried about it. And for them to be learning from sources which may not be completely authoritative, and where there's not support around them, I think is not right. I'm always citing the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which says that kids have a right to know about and to be involved in things that are going to be affecting their future. And it's hard to think of anything that is going to be more central to their future than climate change. But I think to do it really important to be able to do that in a way that certainly starts off with, what do kids know themselves? What are they feeling themselves to begin with? And responding to that. The New Zealand climate change education curriculum, which I'm not sure if it's still going ahead, but it was initially going to be mandated for kids in, I don't know, 12 to 14 age range or something like that. But it included a feelings thermometer, which I thought was quite nice. So they would cover some of the facts about climate change and discussions about climate change. And at the end of each class, kids could fill out this feelings thermometer. So they were being asked to reflect on their own feelings, as well as the teachers having information about how they were responding emotionally to the content that's there. I guess the other thing always is for kids not to feel helpless and hopeless about it. So always having that link to, there's something we can do, and that we do know what the solutions are. We know what to do. We just need to persuade the right people to do the right thing. But there are things that you can meaningfully do as an individual as well as in a group. So I guess that would be my response to teachers, is that they have a responsibility. I would say they have a responsibility to talk about it. The other thing that teachers sometimes raise, but less here in Australia now, but they used to raise, was the sort of political angle, that it was seen as a left-wing issue, and they were worried about appearing to be supporting one side of politics rather than another. I think that's less central in people's thinking now, when they recognise this is a reality. But again, if teachers are confident that what they're doing is talking about facts, not opinions, then, you know, and I guess having some resources about the teachers about how to talk about parents about what you're doing in the classroom would be a really useful thing for you to add to your large collection of resources.
Yeah, thanks, Anne. I think.
What other thoughts? Mary's got some thoughts to add to this.
Please.
Yeah, I agree with Anne that children younger than the 12-year-old age would be, and I think they probably all are already learning things about climate change in the school. And I think that's really foundational to the kind of work you want to do. I guess one thing I do like is that you're using kind of a peer learning model as you have. And so thinking about near peers, like what age groups, are models for a yet younger age group. I guess what I would worry about, and I think some people on this call have much more experiences than I do, is since you're so action focused, which I think is really important, is there a point at which the actions maybe surpass the child's capacities at a given age, and therefore if they were to try them, they would feel ineffectual? So how do you find that spot where there are actions that children can actually accomplish and start to feel some efficacy before they try sort of the big steps?
That's a really great insight, Mary, because I'm thinking about, I think the way that we're thinking about this is that so much of it we're going to need to leave to teachers to figure out in their own context with their own students, and it's going to obviously vary within each class anyway. One of the ways that we've been thinking about doing it is, providing just as many different examples as possible of things that different teachers have tried with, in a given context, and then teachers can say, okay, that one seems like it might be suitable for my group. But also what you were saying just then, Mary, made me think one of the sort of suggestions that we can maybe put to teachers is to do some work in advance of coming up with the sort of selection of activities based on like the larger suite that we have listed on the website of activities that young people might consider taking on. Teachers could maybe think about, oh, here are some ones that I think might be appropriate for my students to actually try to take on in ways that would, have a lower risk of that kind of detrimental impact that you were flagging, Mary.
Yeah, I think having the data on their superpowers is really helpful there, that teachers can be zeroing in on things where kids already have some skills and confidence and competence.
Mm-hmm.
And the other challenge, I think, is that so many kids know that, having a shorter shower or buying less stuff is not really enough. So it's also finding activities that are commensurate with what they realize is the need. But I think having that suite of actions is really one solution there. But I think Mary's quite right. You don't want kids to take on things that have just become a failure experience for them. And that's really important. Jenna's got something to add too.
Yeah, just on that point that Mary brought up as well. It's not only about the students, but also maybe the school context, right? How supportive is the school administration? What types of changes are they willing to support? Can they support? And so I think that that's also something that you might encourage teachers to reflect on, is how much leeway do these particular youth have in their school community? And that might have to do with who the principal is or the school board, or, right? I mean, there's so many factors that are influencing the power distribution. But it can be very, very empowering, I think, if students then feel like their voices are being heard. So something that could be a good preparatory activity is for the teacher in advance to go to the principal, right? Like to think about the school as an environment, as a sort of mini entity that they can try and improve upon, where they can then have their kind of political engagement respected, and already test the waters with the school administrators with, what are the resources available to make sure that if they try something, there is that capacity. Because that can work really well, but maybe teachers have the right feeling for what's possible in their schools.
And I guess the other thing, if schools are fairly resistant to doing things, is kids can do things out of the school context. Like there's good research on kids actually influencing their parents' views and behaviours around climate change. So supporting kids in having those conversations with their families and, asking if they can make changes in the way in which they do things might be another thing to be emphasising as well.
I wanted to add, just follow up a little bit on that. In the US, and I don't know how widespread this is, we have a Green Schools National Network, and they have, all kinds of materials and ideas, but it does focus on, the environment the kids are in, the school. But I've also seen how effective it is after Katrina. I worked with Joy Osofsky in the 9th Ward with the school district there. They wanted to empower the kids to do something right after school started, they started school before FEMA, our emergency responders, wanted to, but it was clearly a powerful step in the right direction of recovery. And the kids focused on little projects to, they interviewed people about what they could do to prepare. It was all oriented to preparation and positive. And I was struck by watching the video of, it's very upbeat, which, when you raise this question to us, it's coming from the teachers. How often does this, concerns come up from the kids you've worked with so far? What kind of concerns do they express? Because, clearly everybody's worried about climate anxiety among kids, and that is very important. But I'm just curious, in your direct experience with the kids, were they scaffolding themselves appropriately as they worked with adults? Did they ever raise these kinds of issues with you, that the teachers? I mean, the teachers may be also just concerned about not knowing what to do, just needing more knowledge and education. But I just wanted to know from your direct experience with the kids, how often some of these issues are coming up from the kids' discussions.
Yeah, we've had conversations with different groups, and maybe Phoebe and I will have different perspectives as well because we tend to look at different things. But what I found is like, well, because this is also a project that is you opt in, you get usually the kids who really want to participate. So so we get a lot of feedback on they were waiting for an opportunity where they could gather with peers their age to talk about these things and also do something. So it's usually a lot of excitement around that. When they start to talk more about what's going on, they tend to also be more, they try to put themselves also in a more empowered position. So immediately they really, I love how kids, they're always very radical and critical. They're always talking about, what needs to be changed and how we're going to change it, and they're not changing it. So what comes from there more than anxiety tends to be more frustration when those expectations are not met. So lots of talk of frustration. We had our first Superpowers workshops in 2022, and that was about 2 years after the big fires in 2019, 2020. And there were some people who shared some stories of watching that devastation, but without getting too emotional, but as a way of showing, their experience, also grieving. Um, but yeah, I think it's more about frustration rather than anxiety. Frustration from not being heard as well. That's kind of it's always there, that topic that we're not heard, and we don't have spaces for us to talk about this freely. And there's been a couple of young people who have survived bushfire, but they also come from they develop these amazing skills, these amazing human superpowers to look at their experience and say, I'm going to share it to support other young people who go through the same thing, and also engage in climate action so other people don't have to go through it. But also acknowledging I have myself been very privileged because after it happened, I had access to these programs that taught me about disaster preparedness. That's why my cause is for all young people to have access to these preparedness programs. I had lots of mental health support. So my cause now is advocating for mental health at schools after disasters, and also in relation to climate change. I haven't seen so much anxiety yet. Maybe it's because we need a little more time for that to emerge. But for example, we never had to use our distress protocol ever so far. Which,
and actually,
yeah.
From what I'm hearing, I know your question, Anne, was about what we're hearing directly from students, but in the past year, it's really the direct work with teachers that I've been doing, and what I've been hearing from them is actually over time, even in the years since those 2019, 2020 big bushfires we had in Australia, there's like a lot of the teachers are telling me about this sort of trajectory where there were quite a few students in the year or so after that were quite actively sort of engaged, and the anxiety stuff and the frustration was coming out more. And then it sounds like my general impression is that it's more, things are more manifesting in kind of like disengagement, disempowerment kind of over the past couple of years.
Yeah, apathy. And they also mentioned that they can clearly tell there's a group of people who want to get engaged, and they're looking for peers who think the same way. But they also feel like that there's so much apathy around them in their own classrooms. And yeah, that contributes to a sense of big discomfort. Yeah, to say the least. Yeah.
You also had a question about developmental appropriateness. And I think, I mean, you've manifested, I mean, you've created something that's very developmentally appropriate, it sounds like to me, just watching, especially with students opting in. But, you know, I've seen there's a whole nature school movement that starts in preschool all over the world. And that's, you know, the preschool version of the kinds of things you're doing, but it's oriented to, you know, and I watched during the pandemic, one of my grandchildren was in nature school, and it was entirely outside for safety reasons. And they learned, you know, it was focused on, you know, it's pretty cold here in the winter in Minnesota. They learned how to stay warm and did everything outside. And it was really striking to see 3 and 4-year-olds getting pretty comfortable with all the little skills they were learning. But it was very oriented to, you know, a lot of these programs in terms of age appropriate green schools or nature schools, they're oriented very much to, I mean, the teachers know, I mean, they know about development and what's appropriate for that age. And but these programs are oriented to, you know, creating, protecting, doing. I mean, there's an underlying empowerment theme to all the work you presented that I think is very important. It's the best action is of some kind that I can do, you know, within my purview is the best, I think, counter to that feeling of frustration and helplessness. Helplessness is worse, way worse than some of the alternatives. But you know, I think teachers, I think some of this teacher issue coming up has to do with being uncertain of whether they'll be able to scaffold. I mean, teachers, there's always scaffolding. They're always gauging how much to, you know, expect of their students, how much to offer and so forth. And it's all individualized. Good teachers naturally individualize it to their students, but it's as if maybe they're uncomfortable themselves with climate change and worried about it. Maybe they don't feel they have enough knowledge. So maybe the sort of professional development angle here could be, you know, something you can work on with a different age group, whatever the age group is of teachers who are you want to engage effectively in climate. I should let other people comment.
Yeah, I'm afraid we are out of time, so I think that we probably have to leave the conversation there. But in a sense, it feels like we're just starting. But thank you for the wise words from people in the audience and your engagement. Lots of nice positive comments in the chat. Thanks so much, Kati and Phoebe, for sharing this with us. It's really nice to see this, you know, as part of our Developmental Scientists for Climate Action series. We will be having another in March, so look out for that. But I think this has been really valuable, and hopefully it'll inspire a lot of work around the world, because that's the other thing is we need to get this stuff out there so variations on this theme are happening to support kids all over the place.
Thank you so much.
It's
been lovely meeting everyone.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and we'd love to stay in touch as well and hear about.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, this is an amazing network. I'm so glad that it was created and that there's a possibility to connect with Australia. Our time zone's not the ideal, but
thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.